Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor John V. Kofis is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello everyone, welcome to a session on the U.S. Department of Education and the broader issue of American neoliberalism in crisis and the decline of the U.S. status in the world economy. The immediate issue before us is whether the United States future in terms of upward social mobility rests on an education system based on private schools and public money, taxpayer money used to subsidize those private schools, or whether the United States, like many countries throughout the world, will strengthen the public school system, thereby strengthening the social fabric and reversing the course of continued social inequality and marginalization of minority populations and the working class. Now, in the last 50 years, under the neoliberal model, neoliberals, including the godfather of American neoliberalism, Milton Friedman from the University of Chicago, had been promoting private education against public education, arguing that public education is not efficient, it doesn't serve the public, it's wasteful in terms of taxpayer spending, and that the solution to the problem of the American education system is not to make public education more efficient by funding it properly, considering there are disparities in funding in various school districts, given that public education is primarily funded at the local level, state level, and that the federal government has a small percentage, in fact, currently 14%, across the board going for public education. Excuse me. So the question is whether the United States will move forward with a program that is designed to support public education and to support the endeavors of a society based on democracy, because the education system is a reflection of the social contract, as the title of this analytical video points out. Whether the social contract in the United States will be one of a hierarchical neoliberal model and an education system primarily for the wealthy and upper middle class, rather than everyone as the ideal of the Enlightenment, on which, of course, public education principles stand. Now, the crisis of the education system, as the current President Donald Trump has tried in the first administration to undermine it and failed, and to shift money from public education to private education, and now in his second administration is trying to do that again. What we have here is an attempt to mirror the neoliberal model of shifting resources from the social welfare program and the public sector into the private sector. And this is presented as a model that will bring greater efficiency. In fact, at a very recent meeting, the latest meeting um, of the Trump cabinet, Linda McMahon, the Secretary of the Department of Education, who was put there in essence to slash and uh, try to, in fact, dismantle the Department of Education. She noted that the future of America in terms of leading the world in technology and science and in all domains rests with a good education system. And the assumption, of course, is that a good education system is not uh, strengthening the public education system, but rather shifting taxpayer money from public education to private schools and using, by the way, as the Trump administration has used, those who have been following these stories know this, using money from the federal government going to especially higher education to force them to adopt policies that are in conformity with the federal government, especially with regard to foreign policy. This is unprecedented considering it is a violation of free speech and it is a violation of academic freedom, a long-standing principle in education. And this is clearly something that has been highly criticized. Now, I want to point out that the neoliberal model, first of all, let me, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of neoliberalism, explain that the foundations of this are in the ideological foundations are in the interwar era, during the era of totalitarianism, as we call it. And the idea of neoliberalism, and it's not to be confused with liberalism, the idea of neoliberalism is to have the state buttress the private sector and to have the state submit to the goals and objectives of the private sector, that is of capitalism, and serve that sector to the detriment of the rest of society. This is, in fact, the ultimate means of social engineering. And in fact, there are many scholars who argue that this is indeed a model which, when you deregulate the economy, which is exactly what the neoliberals want to the extreme degree, when you privatize public assets, including public agencies, including the Department of Education, and of course they want to privatize Social Security. The healthcare sector is semi-privatized. In any case, with the Medicare program, shifting money to private companies under the Advantage Medicare plans. When you do that sort of thing, you are essentially handing public functions over to the private sector. Now, I want to frame this issue in a different way as an academic in international political economy, and perhaps we can have a better grasp of this. At the forefront, in the facade of this, all of this, is that the Trump administration is pursuing a goal of making education free of identity politics that the Democratic Party, the establishment Democrats, have been promoting. Now, let me be very clear that identity politics that the Democratic Party has been pursuing under the neoliberal model since Reagan has been a means of camouflaging the class warfare that has been going on under both Democrats and Republicans. using cultural issues of identity politics, uh, whether it's environmental rights, gay rights, feminism, it doesn't matter what it is, minority rights, and so forth, has been a way to camouflage the class warfare and the um, intent and the accomplishment so far of undercutting the Keynesian state, that is the social welfare state established during the FDR administration, strengthened during, to some degree, during the in the 1960s under John Kennedy and LBJ, that is Lyndon Johnson, and then we begin to see the weakening of this from Reagan to the present. Both political parties have been using identity politics. It's just that the Republicans under Trump have institutionalized authoritarian neoliberalism. That is, they have realized that there is resistance to dismantling, completely dismantling the social welfare state, which is their goal, by the way, given the recent news coming from Washington, D.C., where Elon Musk, in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, the Dodge Group, as it's called, going after a number of federal agencies and gutting them in order to transfer contracts to Silicon Valley. And it was recently revealed, I believe it was the New York Times, that recently revealed that this group, Elon Musk group, went especially after those individuals within federal agencies, by the way, that pointed out, that discovered bloated contracts, multi-billion-dollar contracts going to Silicon Valley, and those were especially targeted to be removed. So there is clearly an effort here to gut the federal agencies, and the Department of Education is just one of those, and to have Silicon Valley and a patronage system that basically replaces those professional federal agency workers, regardless of where they work, whether it's the Social Security Administration or the Department of Education or the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, that is medical scientists. So what we have here is a concerted effort to seriously undercut the role of the state. And this is where I want to introduce my theory several years ago of third worldism. And it's not particularly mine, and many other scholars have analyzed politics in America on the basis of the third worldism. Third world is obviously the so-called global south. They have analyzed what has been happening in America in the last 50 years on the basis of this theory. I believe that the Trump administration in the first term and in this term is not only responding to the crisis and the contradictions of the neoliberal model, which accounts for the shrinking role of the United States economy on a world scale and inability to compete against China, by the way, in every domain from artificial intelligence to electric vehicles, as we have seen, and also in biotechnology and every other sector, like, for example, shipping and manufacturing. The so-called America First is, in fact, an economic nationalist contradicting the neoliberal principle of free trade an economy based on free flow of capital and the classical principles of capitalism that are not rooted in a national economy, but globalization. So, globalization, once identified with neoliberalism, is now an anathema with the authoritarian neoliberals of the Trump administration and, of course, worldwide, whether, for example, it's India or European authoritarian neoliberals or in Latin America. So, what we have within capitalism is that there is a struggle between the um, multicultural neoliberals, the identity politics neoliberals on the one hand, and this is where the culture wars enter in the forefront, and on the other hand, the authoritarian neoliberals who are injecting economic nationalism into neoliberalism while keeping the corporate subsidies, for example, the tax reductions to corporations and to billionaires, keeping those aspects and deregulation above all, as well as privatization. So the education system fits into this model. And the third worldism issue here comes in because the United States is now revealing aspects of a third world country. It has been, and this has been going on for a long time. The fact is that the United States Constitution, based on 18th century Enlightenment era principles of liberal democracy, are no longer relevant. The social contract in the United States is clearly one serving as a number of US elected officials on the progressive side in the United States have pointed out, whether out in town hall meetings, in public gatherings, or on the floor of the Senate and the House, the United States is an oligarchic society. The idea that Russia has oligarchs um, is um, is fine and good, but it's not the only country. The United States has the richest man in the world inside the White House, uh, undermining the role of the government, the role of the state, I should say more specifically. And the role of the state in the United States is not the classical role of the state as an arbiter of social classes and even an arbiter of the capitalist within the capitalism, the capitalist class, making sure that intersectoral competition is maintained, that one sector doesn't dominate, as for example, the railroads in the late 19th century, when this issue during the progressive era after the election of 1900 is launched, and there was a realization by both Republicans and Democrats, that is by both Theodore Roosevelt as well as Woodrow Wilson, that indeed intersectoral competition would be healthy for capitalism. So they adopted a policy of market equilibrium that is rationalizing capitalism. And this is when they introduced federal agencies to regulate the economy, to regulate capitalism so that capitalism grows and the whole national economy grows in an international setting, because capitalism is not and never has been a national economic system. It has always been international. Capital has always been global. It doesn't have a flag. It goes wherever it realizes the highest profit. Now, what we have today is indeed a serious crisis with the United States that has held the position as the dominant economic power in the world, declining against the rising of China and the BRICS group, together, of course, behind China. The Department of the question is, can education play a role here? The Chinese government clearly believe uh, in the last 30 years, and especially under Xi Jinping today, that education is the catalyst to continued progress of China in science and technology. The United States says, and Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education that Trump appointed, by the way, with zero experience in the domain of education, um, she said, "Yeah, that's right. We believe in the same goals. The question is how to achieve the goals." China is pouring massive amounts of money into public education. The United States is weakening the public education domain and transferring, ultimately wanting to transfer money into private education. And the question is whether that will best serve society as a whole or result in a very hierarchical social structure. It's already hierarchical, by the way, given that 60% of the American people live paycheck to paycheck. Okay. It's already hierarchical, but it will become even more so. Now, I want to stress that the Department of Education's problems are part of a broader structural problem in America, and Trump is not is just a front person here. The government, in fact, all these people in government that are within in the Trump administration, coming from business, by the way. Most of them come from the business world, come from Wall Street, all of them ideologically dogmatic that neoliberalism is the solution, although the fact that these people have adopted, from Trump down, have adopted economic nationalism is proof positive. Even an undergraduate in an economics course or in a social science course would realize, political science or a history course, any of those courses, would realize the contradiction. On the one hand, neoliberalism is the solution. On the other hand, economic nationalism must be ejected to save neoliberalism. This is the sort of thing that has one scratching their head. Um, the I was struck by the department, that the Treasury Department Secretary at the most recent meeting, cabinet meeting, where Trump, of course, presided in the White House, said that our ultimate goal is to privatize the economy, as though the United States doesn't have a privatized economy throughout its history, as though this is some kind of a revelation. Um, what he was really saying is dismantle completely the social welfare state, the remnants of the social welfare state, because there isn't much left, by the way, and privatize as much of the functions of the state as possible. Now, here is something that's interesting, and a few scholars around the world have uh, written about this and have caught this. The question is, um, under what is the role of the state here? The historically, as I said earlier, the role of the state is to be the arbiter in society with between social classes and within the capitalist class, so that so that the intersectoral competition continues. The role of the state here is, under Trump, under authoritarian neoliberalism, is to serve very specific corporate interests and individual billionaires rather than capitalism as a whole. That is something new. So the role of the state is reduced to clientelism, as it's called in scholarly literature. That is, that the state becomes an instrument where there is a patronage system behind it, as though this is a third world country. And that's why I said earlier, the United States is lapsing, has been lapsing toward third worldism rapidly, by the way. If we reduce the role of the state to such level and we eliminate the professionalism, we take out the professionalism from the federal agencies and we reduce them to patronage networks, then why would the United States be any different than Turkey, which operates under authoritarian neoliberalism? Erdogan, of course, just recently arrested his major opponent, political opponent, as well as some of his followers. So this is the danger, and this is of pursuing authoritarian neoliberalism, is that all of society then institutionally follows the authoritarian model. Now, with regard to the education department, in a CNN interview, Linda McMahon, I was struck, I saw the interview on tape, and I was struck when she said that her ultimate goal is to create the best education system in America possible. And she was asked, well, what model are you looking at? And she pointed out that Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, is a good example of the model that we want to follow. I researched the state of Louisiana and did statistical analysis between the state of Louisiana and the New England states, and found out the reason she mentioned the state of Louisiana is because the governor of Louisiana, the state legislature, they're Republicans. They shifted massive amounts of money from public education into charter schools and private education. And that Louisiana ranks 49th out of 50, there are only 50 states, 49th, one above the last in terms of education outcomes. It's the worst state, the second worst state in the union in terms of education outcomes. And that's the one she pointed to. And the only reason is because of the massive shift, I believe it was $100 billion, massive shift of monies from the public sector to private schools. Then when I looked at the statistical analysis of New England states, and there was a correlation between the New England states, which are the top schools in the United States in terms of education outcomes, there's a correlation between money poured into public education and overall education outcomes in every domain in New England, in all the New England states. So what you have here is an ideologically driven group, but as Senator Bernie Sanders pointed out just recently in a recent speech on the Senate floor, these people are trying to take money out of departments, various agencies in the federal government. And for what purpose? Because there is a bill on the floor to give back 4.5 trillion. A good chunk of that, the senator said well over $1 trillion is going to go to the billionaires. A good chunk of that is going to go to the richest people, to the richest 5% of Americans. The question is, this short-term return of everybody's taxpayer money going to the richest segment of the population is a new twist in the social contract. And it impacts, it is to the detriment of the rest of society, because that money comes out of everything else that serves the rest of society, from veterans, medical needs, to Social Security, to Medicare, to education. So they want to shift money to strengthen the richest people, and as Warren Buffett has pointed out, as well as some others, by the way, to their credit, some billionaires, we don't need it, we're already billionaires. They have enough money to live 100 lives over. They don't need more money. Society needs more money. Market equilibrium needs more money, not a handful of people who are ideologically driven and are bent into the pathology of accumulation of more capital, um, as though it's some kind of a game. Now, uh, on March 25th, 2025, Trump himself announced that he was looking at a new era in the Department of Education, and that the Department of Education was inefficient and that it was not serving the goals of American society. I should tell you that the Department of Education was created by Jimmy Carter in 1979, became operational in 1980. The Department of Education's functions are not to determine curriculum or to set policy for schools. Far from it, the Department of Education is a data collection organization, and it has been working to distribute money. And that's where Trump came in and said, well, let's take that function out and give it to the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration, by the way, would be distributing money, taking on functions of the Department of Education, which would be gutted, dismantled essentially, except that the Small Business Administration, under Musk's directive, slashed 43% of its workforce. So they want to give more functions from the Department of Education, which they're slashing, and they want it to be dismantled. Although that's under congressional mandate, to the Small Business Administration, which has already lost 43% of its workforce because of what Musk has done to the Small Business Administration. So that's another glaring contradiction in how they're managing the government, by the way. The Department of Education has been a catalyst into serving the needs of the low income groups, people with disabilities, and a vehicle to try to provide education for disadvantaged groups and all groups in society. Obviously, the rich have no problem. So the Department of Education has been doing that. It's providing 14%, as I believe I noted earlier, of the school budgets overall. The Trump administration argues that it wants to save $17 billion from the Department of Education, which of course is a drop in the bucket when you have a $7 trillion budget. But that's another story. And by the way, they don't ever explain where the waste is, whether it's in the Department of Education or any other education, except to provide vague generalizations about waste and fraud and so forth, without pointing exactly to where it is. And when pressed, they then zero in on money going to migrants, students, going to support gay rights issues, going to support environmental issues, identity politics. So in the forefront, they put again at the front of this issue, they put culture wars, because it's an emotion. Culture wars emotionally work with the American people, by the way. They respond to culture wars. Whether they're on one side or the other, they respond to culture wars. So they put that in the forefront when in fact the real issue is to distract the American people create an education system that is very hierarchical, even more so than it is today, because the three things that are out of reach for most of the American people are housing, this is not a secret, medical care, okay? 30,000 Americans die every year waiting for approval from Medicare for procedures and medication, by the way. 30,000 people. Housing, medical, healthcare is the other unaffordable thing for many people. The US has the highest, costliest medical system, healthcare system in the world, by the way. Okay? And not one that's the most accessible to people, but one of the least accessible to the population, because there is no universal healthcare in the United States. And the third issue is education, especially higher education. These things are out of reach for most people. The the other thing that I want to mention is the attack of the in talking about education and dismantling the Department of Education, the attack of the Trump administration against universities. Now, in all fairness, this started with Biden. The Biden administration started and launched an attack helped by billionaires and Wall Street firms to make sure that American universities comply to the foreign policy agenda, which was under Biden, military aid for Ukraine, and as well as for Israel. Now, the war in Ukraine remains a conventional war between Ukraine behind it, which is NATO, and primarily the US, of course, and then on the other side, Russia, with China behind it. The Biden administration launched a campaign against, again, with Wall Street and billionaires supporting Israel, against universities. Many universities rely heavily on corporate donors and billionaires and multimillionaires for donations, whether it's for scholarships or buildings or equipment, they rely on them. And that's the leverage that the private sector has over universities to determine policy, because the board of trustees on many of the universities is made up of business people. And they, under the neoliberal system in the last 50 years, they have driven the university to serve the business community. So the concept of 18th century Enlightenment era education, which is for the individual to realize his or her creative potential, for all individuals, not just the wealthiest people, by the way, in society, for all individuals, to realize their creative potential and to turn that into something constructive and productive for society, so that all of society benefits, whether it's in the domain of medicine or engineering or architecture, doesn't matter what it is. This is the ideal of education. The ideal of education is not for the student to become a robot for a corporation to turn a profit. It is to be to realize the creative potential as a human being, to realize the various layers of one's character and personality, and to bring out whatever creative potential the individual has. And all people are creative in different fields. And to, of course, make a constructive contribution to society through their endeavors. It is not to serve as a corporate slave, as a worker, so that the corporation can raise its profit margins. This, of course, with neoliberalism changes. The neoliberal goal is for the university to be commodified, to commodify the student. The student is a consumer. And I noticed this by the late 1980s in the second Reagan term, when I was in higher education, of course, we refer to, not we, the administration referred to students as our consumers. And I had not heard that. When I was a student in the 1970s, we were students, we were not consumers. Then we became consumers as though we were buying a car. In any case, very different commodity. Education is not like buying a car. Education is the unleashing of the creativity of the human mind. In any event, the university was under attack under Biden, primarily because American college students in a number of campuses in elite schools, not from Harvard and onwards, the University of California, some of the best schools in the country were under attack because American students supported peace rather than war. They supported the end of apartheid. They supported ceasefire. And even when the International Criminal Court issued its judgment on Israel, and even when the United States, the United Nations, the United Nations General Assembly spoke out, most of the members of the Security Council, except the United States with veto power, spoke out, and there was consensus on a world level that the war that Israel was carrying out in Gaza was genocide. The U.S. and its very few allies in this endeavor supported Israel in carrying out the genocide war against the world community and the world court, the International Criminal Court. Okay, so the students coming out in favor of peace and end to hostilities were targeted as anti-Jewish, not anti-Zionist. And in fact, Congress argued that there was no difference between being anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, in other words. It's the same thing. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Although there were Jewish students and faculty and activists saying, no, it's not the same thing. Not in our name as Jews do we accept this Zionist campaign against the people in Gaza. So what we have here is Biden going after universities and billionaire donors and Wall Street firms going after universities. A number of top administrators from Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania were fired. Columbia were on their way out. They were pushed out because they upheld academic freedom and the First Amendment of that is free speech. So the university itself was under attack. And we have with Trump right now, currently, an attack on universities. And a number of university professors and analysts and journalists, to their credit, some journalists have argued that this is a reversal to the McCarthy era. Okay. Joe McCarthy, senator from Wisconsin, unleashed a campaign against communists, the Red Scare era of the 1950s, going after the intelligentsia, going after Hollywood writers and producers and actors, and using the Cold War to engender conformity through the intelligentsia. Trump is doing the exact same thing with universities, except much more efficiently. Instead of a Red Scare, because there is no communism, there is no Soviet Union. People might argue China is communist. Yes, but it has a capitalist economy well integrated into the capitalist world system. In fact, the U.S. would not do very well without China's capitalist system, such as it is, a quasi-state system. One-party state, communist state, yes, but a capitalist economy. So there's no communism. So what do? Trump is using the money that the federal government is giving to universities, forcing them to comply to its foreign policy agenda. Silence critics. Silence critics. In academic freedom, in freedom of speech, conform to our agenda. And this is indeed a reversal to the early Cold War era. This is going back to the McCarthy era. This is why a number of writers have pointed out that this is very dangerous when the most precious thing, there's a reason, by the way, I was in academia for many decades. There's a reason why academic freedom is cherished. It's without it, you can't pursue independent research and allow the empirical evidence to take you where it will. When there is a directed goal, this is the goal you must reach. These are the conclusions you must reach. In anything, whether it's, for example, a goal of some chemical company giving money to a university to do research in favor of a chemical that they use that there are doubts about that it's harmful to the environment, or whether it's a goal on foreign policy, it's the same thing. If there is no academic freedom in education, education is indoctrination. It's not education. That's indoctrination, and that is a sign of authoritarianism. Okay, this is what took place in the interwar period, in the interwar era, in some European countries, most notably Germany, the Third Reich, and fascist Italy. But also others, Antonio Salazar's in Portugal, Francisco Franco in Spain. So this is a sign of going down the path of authoritarianism. I want to end this analytical session on the higher education by pointing out some statistics that I had to investigate. The United States has recently, under Trump, launched an attack on not just on those who are pro-Palestinians and specifically Palestinians who are in the United States, but actually foreign students, a lot of foreign students, arguing, in fact, that the senator from Louisiana, John Kennedy from Louisiana, Republican, by the way, same name as the president in 1960, who won the election in 1960, but argued that, yeah, it's well and good to have these foreign students, but actually if they're against our country, if they somehow damage, and if they take, even if they're for our country, if they take positions from our own, there's something wrong. I want to bring up an issue here, which is, I should have brought it up at the beginning, but it's a very important issue here with regard to education. and the attack of the United States government right now of Trump on multiculturalism, diversity, um, and on migrants, okay, minorities, and broadly speaking, the working class, and the America First label. Throughout history, civilization, by the way, has been around for 5,000 years, from Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq, to the present, 5,000 years. Those societies that made progress in civilization were those societies that cherished a very valuable um, principle, that is cultural diffusion, embracing the knowledge and contributions of all cultures. 5th century Athens, the golden age of Athens, reached such heights, and the reason that classical Greece became the foundation of Western civilization is because 5th century Athens was a sponge of absorbing everything that the Mediterranean world had to offer. Okay, it was an open society, and it was the epitome of cultural diffusion. The contributions made to 5th century Athens enriched posterity, all of civilization. A closed society, Athens was an open society, a closed society tilting toward militarism is a society destined to decay. Throughout history, in the absence of cultural diffusion, societies decay. The United States right now, in narrowing the boundaries of education, let's privatize for the rich, which eventually it does mean that fewer and fewer people from the working class and the lower middle class will have opportunities for education, especially when they got public education, transfer money to private charter schools, and make higher education even more expensive. It's going to be out of reach. And it's already out of reach for many people. And education is the catalyst to social mobility, by the way. And it is also the catalyst to progress of any society. So this brings me back to what the contradictions here, and what does this mean for American society. 22% of all American students, by the way, are foreign, and roughly 23% of the faculty. I recently had a conversation with a European oncologist who went to Harvard Medical School, and then he went to Georgetown to do some work there. And he was telling me everyone in the faculty that he was associated with was foreign born at Harvard within his domain. In fact, his mentor was Chinese. Okay? So what we have here is the contribution. This is a good thing, by the way. This contribution to the enrichment of American society comes from the world. What the Trump policy wants, and the senator from Louisiana, Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, of course, said as much, is to regiment that element. In other words, to limit cultural diffusion, okay, under the America First label. Now, let's look at where the U.S. ranks in education. If in the last 50 years, under the neoliberal model, privatization has been so good, the United States, how come the United States is not among the top 10 highest ranking countries in the world in education outcomes overall. It's not in the top 10. True, the US has the best graduate, postgraduate education in the world. But then when you look at the faculty and the students in those graduate programs, especially in science and technology from MIT to Caltech, what you find is what? Cultural diffusion, foreign born. Okay. So now the student outcomes in the United States versus the world are not good. They rank very low, especially in science and mathematics. So why hasn't the neoliberal model worked? When you look at the statistics of what the US has spent in both public and private education, why does it rank so low against the world? Because it spends more than China, but China has better outcomes. China, huge commitment to public education, okay? And China continues to insist on highly centralized model of education. The Trump administration, with dismantling the Department of Education and transferring back some of those functions, transferring the money functions, by the way, to the loans to the Small Business Administration. There was also talk about the Treasury Department taking on some of those functions. China is centralizing even more education, because centralization, which the neoliberals are against, by the way, they want decentralization, local control. Centralization means that you want to equalize. You have an assumption that social justice can only come through centralized efforts to equalize. This is what happens. This is what happened during the New Deal. FDR was insistent on centralizing the functions of government, the function of government. The central government was the central government, that is the federal government, during the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s, was strengthened. Okay, weakening the central government, strengthening the states, means greater inequality. It's that simple. More hierarchy. China is going the opposite direction. China has the best outcomes when it comes to science and technology. China is leading in artificial intelligence. It's not following, it's leading. China just recently announced that the largest electric vehicle company in the world, BYD, not Tesla, China's BYD, is working on finalizing car battery recharging in as little time as it takes to fill up your gas tank. This is progress. That's because China stresses the role of public education, and within that, science and technology. Okay. So where are the results of the neoliberal miracle? When you look at the statistics of the United States education system, with all that emphasis on private education, and the fact that $1.8 trillion are right now the total of student debt, 1.8 trillion. This is mind-boggling. What exactly what does that show about private education? The total GDP of the United States is 28 trillion, and close to 2 trillion is the student debt. Okay. Now, as far as I want to wrap this up, as far as the future of American education, right now it looks bad. Because if all of this goes through and Department of Education is under congressional mandate, was Congress, they need 60 votes in the Senate to get this, to do anything. The question is, what are they going to do? Trump obviously has defied the courts, has managed to get a lot his way through executive orders, but the question is, what is the future of American education? The future of American education, all we have to do is look at the last 50 years of increasingly costly education system. The richest districts within states, whether in public education, I shouldn't say whether, in public education, getting obviously the best student outcomes, with the poorer districts associated with the working class and minority populations, underfunded, by the way, underfunded. And so what we have is limiting the limitation of upward social mobility in the United States, because the US, under a deliberate policy, is carving out an education path that is exclusive. It excludes the poor. It excludes the working class. Many among the working class, many, it especially for college, I shouldn't say it excludes them from K through 12, but it certainly undereducates them because it wants to gut public education, wants to transfer money to the private schools. And so they are the ones who suffer. So it relegates the bottom half of, at least the bottom half of the population, to a substandard education system with limited upward social mobility. And this, sociologists point out, is the real result of what is going on right now. This is going to be the real result, because this has been the real result up to now. Okay. The last thing I want to say is that that Wall Street is behind this. This did not come from the mind of Trump. He was handed an agenda, by the way. When you look at the policies that he's pursuing policies that think tanks, right-wing think tanks backed by billionaires and Wall Street, handed to the Trump administration. This is one of them. The Heritage Foundation and billionaires like the Koch brothers in Texas, but other billionaire families have been advocating exactly this. Upward social mobility for workers and for migrants and for minorities? No. Keep them there in the working class and marginalized. Education, a luxury for the wealthy, as it was before public education was started. Public education was started, by the way, it was an outgrowth of the industrial capitalism. It was started out of necessity to serve the industrial economy. Its roots are in the 18th century, but it takes off in the 19th century with a second, when Europe industrializes, and then the late 19th century with the second industrial revolution, it really takes off. And so there is the realization that society needs education to serve the capitalist economy as it's evolving very rapidly. Now they're going back to pre-19th century model of people with money get an education. So they experience upward mobility even more. So what we have here is a form of social engineering. I want to conclude with this thought. What the Trump administration is doing, and it's not Trump the individual, but rather Wall Street, the oligarchy, as a number of progressive Democrats have been arguing, the oligarchy of America is creating a society. It's social engineering a society and injecting this into the social contract that it is evolving, a neoliberal authoritarian social contract. And this is a reflection of where society is going. It's not that it is not that it isn't here. It's here already. It's here already. But it will most likely become worse. I thank you for listening. I ask you to write questions, comments, and to please join this channel, which is educational. And it is managed by my very good friend, Asad Ali. Thank you very much.